You just got to do it right. You just got to do it right. We're talking about real money here. We're talking about how important Bitcoin is and that it is real money. But if they don't treat it like real money, then it's not. Can't underestimate the important role that stablecoins play in the ecosystem. Frictionless movement of value. We're excited about anything that enables us to compete at a higher level, that makes our markets healthier, more diverse, more liquid.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and everyone who's listening, welcome to the New Money Podcast, the show where we talk about the future of money and hopefully find out exactly how that looks like. We've got as usual, we've got the Lydian Lion, which is the oldest coin in the world, and we've got Bobby with us today, who is kind of working at the very frontier of this industry, and we couldn't be more excited to have you on the show. Bobby, I'm going to do a quick intro on you, although many might already know you. You were previously Chief Commercial Officer at Kraken, an amazing tenure at CME Group, one of the original exchanges, right? And since 2021, you're at Bitstamp, which you've scaled and recently sold to Robinhood for 200 million. An incredible journey. And if we think about Bitstamp was founded in 2011. This was, and I looked this up beforehand to not be embarrassingly wrong, but this was the magical year where Bitcoin crossed the €1 price. I mean, I think that this is like the key question. Like, how the hell were you guys so early? Like, who came up with that?
Well, first of all, it's great to be here, Ferdy. I'm super excited to talk about this. It's my favorite. One of my favorite topics is Bitstamp and the founding story, which of course was way before my time. But I can't quite get my head around the level of vision you have to have if you're sitting in your garage, perhaps in 2011, like our founders were, and participating in the Bitcoin kind of burgeoning ecosystem, but then having the forethought to see what's happening with Mt. Gox even before it melts down, and understanding that more people are going to need access to this, and really seeing the vision of how important this technology and these types of currencies will be in the world. It's just quite amazing to me that they could not only connect all of those dots, our founders, but also then put it in motion in a very, very credible way, right? So they created Bitstamp. It was founded in Slovenia. Both the founders, Slovenia technology, young guys, and got super passionate and were able to create something out of nothing. And yeah, the rest is history, although there's a lot to talk about there when you've been in a space like the crypto space for this long.
Would you say that Mt. Gox was kind of like this influential situation for Bitstamp and the founding story? Because I know that for Kraken it was, right? And I think Jesse kind of like very much deliberately spun it out of that mess, right? And said, okay, we're going to build something regulated, clean, safe, and retail ready. How was that for in the early Bitstamp days?
Yeah, I can't speak for those guys. Obviously, I wasn't here, but I do think it was an important part of the context. I speculate that they could see what was happening, with Mt. Gox, and whether or not they could foresee a meltdown, or whether, or if they just concluded that, wow, the world needs something that's more industrial strength. That was certainly a part of the calculus for them. I'm quite confident.
Makes a bunch of sense. And I think when these guys started to build Bitstamp, you probably were still at CME, right? Kind of one of the OG exchanges. And I'd love for kind of like the audience to get your audio on the journey and how that kind of brought you to Bitstamp and the steps before.
Yeah, so I actually joined CME in 2012. I'd been a co-founder and CEO of kind of an M&A and strategy advisory firm with a technology tool, and CME was a big client of ours. We sold our company, and it's, a little bit of a longer story here, but ultimately CME recruited me to join the leadership team and lead a division at CME called Products and Services. It's kind of the P&L role there. And one of my responsibilities was our venture arm, CME Ventures, which rolled up into me. And that team, which was, as you would hope and you would expect with a venture capital arm, was very, very future oriented and forward looking. And they started pitching me crypto and blockchain investments in late 2013. And in 2013, I was aware of Bitcoin, but that's about it. And as you mentioned, CME is literally one of the original exchange marketplaces that ever occurred. And at the time was, I think, a 160-year-old institution So, not innovative, yes, but not necessarily, an obvious player in the emerging crypto space. But what we were able to do with CME Ventures was start making some investments, which we did in 2014. And I, as kind of the exec role, we got to be a board observer on some of our portfolio company boards, including Ripple, for instance, which we invested in 2014. So I was able to see and have a kind of a front row seat to some of the conversations and some of the opportunities that were attached to this technology and this approach. And obviously, kind of blew my mind. And as a CME exec, I could see tremendous opportunity, but I could also see risks, like challenges to our business model associated with blockchain technology, which could really fundamentally change the way a lot of workflows happen in the traditional financial services side. Obviously, wasn't so obvious then, but quite obvious now. And then myself and my colleagues, we were able to take our learnings from the venture experiences, and all those investments did very, very well for us. And turn it into the makings of a strategy, even still early, 2015, 2016 timeframe. And, what became ultimately the Bitcoin futures product for CME. And again, if you think about 2016, when we were seeking approvals from our board, for instance, to launch that product, Bitcoin was still, a very, speculative, misunderstood, without the best reputation, in the world, given Silk Road and some of the other craziness that was associated with it. And so it was, a kind of an amazing set of decisions that we were able to push through that enabled CME to really be a leader on the traditional side. Because once we launched that product, which was, I believe, early 20, really got the attention of a lot of institutions and a lot of players on the traditional side.
I'd love to unpack all of these things, right? Maybe double clicking on the Ripple investment, which has to be 100x or something like that. How did that initial investment memo look like, right? Because I think with stablecoins and everything, crypto cross-border payments is hotter than ever probably. But I think Ripple has always been one of these like incredibly exciting companies in the space. Was that already back then the idea, or what got you hooked?
Yeah, great question. So, at the time, so again, 2014, there weren't a million investable opportunities from a venture capital perspective, first of all, and from an institutional venture capital perspective. And Ripple is one that stood out right away because it was definitely a more kind of professional and institutional focused business, early stage business. And as a board observer, it was also clear to me that the business model wasn't set yet. They had this great idea around cross-border payments, and they had, a blockchain and a currency. So it was quite informative for me. And I think back on this even today as I'm working through business issues, just how that conversation evolved in terms of finding the opportunities. So yeah, it definitely stood out then. It still stands out today as a, incredibly innovative, very professional and very strategic kind of company. And we were super pleased to be early investors, and the investment did well for CME Group.
Walk me through one of these reflections, right? Like they saying history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Kind of what are the things that you sometimes look back on the early Ripple days that you kind of feel you're confronted with again and again today also?
Well, this gets to one of my favorite things about my job and my life, and the choice that I made, the kind of weird radical choice I made at the time to join, to really join the crypto space and focus on it full time, which is that in crypto, it's the beating heart and the lifeblood is innovation. And there's so much innovation. There was at the time when so much was being created. But even today, there are so many very credible teams working on really interesting and really groundbreaking stuff. And that becomes quite addictive. And sitting in the role that I had at CME at the time, which again, innovative, but very large, and very long-standing company. I wasn't quite familiar with the level of daily innovation and the level of risk taking that entrepreneurial companies take. So when I was able to join Kraken, that was a great set of lessons for me too, around, a really visionary founder who is willing to take risks, and, and a community around him and that company that, is passionate about making a difference and making something lasting in the world. So, and then extends to Bitstamp too. Very similar DNA of Bitstamp around, not just the profit and loss and not just the dollars and cents, but like the commitment to doing something important. And that I love about crypto. When I think back to those Ripple days, that's what came through for me then as well.
What was in fact the biggest risk you guys took at Kraken? If you think about that culture.
It's hard to think of any one thing in particular, but I will say that when you're hiring hundreds of people and you're in a space that is still, at the time when I joined Kraken, still quite emerging and controversial, even 2018, and the market cycles hadn't really even been fully understood. So, every day was a risk, and not just at Kraken, but at all of these pioneering companies that, that were willing to put a lot of money, put a lot of people's livelihood, put their own reputations, put all of these things at risk every day to create something. But that's how it works, right? That's what pioneers do, and that's how innovation happens. But I could have had a really interesting and productive career and not had that experience that I've had at Kraken and at Bitstamp, where it's every day new opportunities requiring decisive action and real risk. And that's great. I think that's for me personally, it's been just a really challenging and rewarding set of experiences, but also for the world, it's just a necessary piece of the puzzle.
And I mean, let's look at the kind of like, which I think is much more of a watershed innovation probably than people give it credit for, the crypto futures at CME, right? I think because this is where lots of the price discovery happens. It continues to be this extremely popular product. Like, I think lots of people hold the belief that this was, I think, in a way, like a bit of a mainstream moment, even though it was very early. How did that internal conversation go? And like you mentioned it, like a set of spectacular decisions that led the company to adopt it. What were like the winning arguments and how to make that case?
I'll oversimplify, but in essence, at the beginning, everyone was against it because of not because they thought the technology wasn't important necessarily, or not because they were dead set against crypto taking hold in the world, but more like the reputational risk. So CME Group has a just, spotless and stellar reputation and plays a really important trust role in the whole financial ecosystem. And so not to be taken lightly. So at the time, 2016 is what I'm thinking of, it was really a question about reputation. Like, well, so if we associate ourselves, CME Group, with Bitcoin, which is also associated with some dicey enterprises and a lot of speculation, how is that going to reflect on us? And could it blow up in some negative way and create a problem? And so that's a very important, valid set of concerns that we had to work through. And particularly when you think about the board of directors of a public company like CME Group, where they have to, their fiduciary responsibility is to make sure that the franchise doesn't get damaged in some way. So the conversations, however, that really carried the day were quite pragmatic, right? And I remember conversations where I was presenting and trying to convince board members or people that this was going to be really important, that Bitcoin was going to be really important. And the only way to get an advantage as a market operator is to get there first. And I was not getting traction with those arguments, frankly. And I could tell, and I pivoted to a conversation that was more like, look, okay, guys, you might agree with me, you might disagree with me about the role Bitcoin might play in the future, but let me make a suggestion. We have a fixed cost infrastructure business, and it costs us almost nothing to put up a new contract. And so my advice to you is put a line in the water. I might be right, I might be wrong, but it's low cost, and you can put a line in the water and see what happens. And ultimately, and again, this wasn't just attributable to me at all, but ultimately the teams came together and the board made the right decision. And I credit them. It wasn't an obvious thing to do, but they did it, and it's paid off very, very well for them and for the ecosystem.
In the derivatives trading rabbit hole. I just had kind of Josh from One Trading on the show who's essentially building the first onshore perp trading platform. Do you think like standard data futures are still the best kind of derivatives product for crypto, or are perpetual futures really the way to go if you can?
Definitely think there's room and appetite for both, but I will tell you, I think the perpetual swap is a great innovation. It's a great innovation that came out of the crypto space, and it's a really useful product, and it's got really great acceptance, and I think we'll move into other asset class spaces as well. And what I think is important when you think about derivatives is, as you alluded to, a fully regulated offering. So even today, the crypto derivative space, which is much larger than the spot side of the market and growing faster. But depending on how you count it, based on my analysis, about 95% of the platforms and the volume, therefore, is offshore, or lightly regulated jurisdictions. And, as a guy who's been working hard in the industry for quite a few years, like, that makes me nervous, right? Yeah. Do you know who else was offshore? FTX. You know what I mean? It's different. I'm not saying that those platforms are, don't have integrity or are not focused on the right things, but I will tell you it's different. When you are lightly regulated, there's layers of oversight that are missing. And those layers of oversight translate into more robust processes and more reliable controls. And so, I think and in fact, Bitstamp, intends to play a role here. The marketplace needs more fully regulated perpetual swap offerings with liquidity, right? So, so that, there's a handful of people working on such things, and I'm not here to announce any new products, but that is something really important to us at Bitstamp.
And I have to double click. Like, is that something you guys are working on? Are you kind of onshoring perps? How do you think about these products?
Yes, possibly. Yes.
Possibly.
I will say this, we have a MiFID license in the EU. And as you know, we've got, I think, the most extensive licensing footprint across the industry, full stop. But we do have a MiFID license in the EU, which allows us to offer such a product. And we would like to do that. But like I said, I'm not here to announce a launch, but I'm here to say that's a very important strategic focus for us.
Let's talk about these licenses, right? I think Ivy were in the business of acquiring licenses as well. I think the broader crypto industry has moved towards at least a certain degree of appreciation for regulation, right? And I think the narrative has, in my opinion, kind of shifted towards, okay, we want to be regulated. Give us the regulation. All of these conversations that are happening, especially in the States, of course, right now. And you guys were early to that party. Once again, I'd love to get your kind of like inside out, but also outside in view, as you weren't there. Like, where did that conviction come from? I think 8 years ago, get the first license in Europe.
Yeah. So, this also falls under the category of, our visionary founders, right? So again, I wasn't there in 2016 at Bitstamp, but in 2016, our founders and their leadership team, I think recognized this moment. They anticipated that, that there will be a time when traditional financial services companies, all the way up to the largest global banks in the world, are going to have a pathway into the marketplace. And so let's start now in 2016 to make ready to be an obvious choice for such organizations when they're ready. So what did they do? As you mentioned, they were the first to go get a license, right? And so Bitstamp got a license in Luxembourg in 2016. They also took some other steps that I think at the time must have been quite radical, right? So they made the choice to outsource our custody. We had technology for that, just like the others in the space did, but they had the forethought to say, well, you know what? Certain types of institutions aren't going to be comfortable with that counterparty risk of custody and exchange in one point of failure, if you want to think of it that way. So they outsourced our custody to BitGo, fully licensed and regulated custodian. They took it a step further then. They said, all right, we've got good matching technology, but we don't have the best in the world. So they outsourced our matching engine, again, 2016 to NASDAQ. And, low latency and high reliability wasn't the standard in 2016 by any stretch, but they were like, it's going to be some point, so let's get there faster. And then the final thing I would point to as a great example, which again, I can't imagine that these guys came to this conclusion, but they did, and thank goodness they did, is they were like, all right, what is the like gold standard of trust? Not just for institutions, but even for retail participants. And they concluded that was a global financial audit, like a third party audit where somebody comes in and makes sure all the books are right and all the processes underpinning them are right. And so in 2016, they started getting global financial audits from a big four accounting firm. So again, I can promise you in 2016, no crypto companies were thinking about this. And we've been well served by it. We're the only crypto company on the planet that can say we have 8 years of clean audit opinions from a big four accounting firm. And that has, contributed to our DNA to a pretty significant degree. Like we know we have to do things right. And we know we need good process controls at every turn, because we also know the auditor is going to come in and check. So these things have created a little bit different approach to the market for Bitstamp than some of the others in the space.
What do you like, in your opinion, as kind of like CEO now, knowing the business for free? Would you say that's like the main USP and the main positioning you want to drive for Bitstamp in the market?
Yeah. And to be clear, I'm CEO for Bitstamp USA and Chief Commercial Officer for the company globally. Myself and our leadership team at Bitstamp, it's definitely a trust first mindset. And we think that, first of all, that's the right way to run a risk business. When I say risk business, I mean like any trading or investment or, transaction based financial services company is a risk business. So you got to do it right. You got to do it all the way. And then secondly, we also think it's a good go to market strategy because not everybody has that same DNA. And we think that this next wave of adoption that's happening now, both in terms of retail and institutions, is different than the guys who came earlier in 2017 and then in 2021. We think this current wave that I'm hoping we're in is different. They care about different things and they're motivated by different things. And it's more on the trust side and, who do I want to really partner with? And these factors play to our strengths.
If you think about the different products on the spot trading side, and then different customer groups, retail, institutional, that you guys are serving, where would you say Bitstamp, in kind of like obviously a competitive market, where is uniquely positioned, and where are you exceptionally good in your view?
Yeah, a few things. First of all, we're a very global business, and so we can serve customers and institutional clients, in a whole range of jurisdictions. And one of our particular areas of strength is Europe, as you would imagine, right? That's our home base. That's where we were founded, and that's where the bulk of our operation lies. In Europe, our brand is also quite strong. And this is, I'm a bit biased, take it with a grain of salt, but, I think we have this really great reputation for, being an OG, trailblazer and pioneer, but also very well trusted and transparent and adult kind of organization attached to it. So we're always trying to build on our strengths globally and all of the flexibility that comes with that, but also Europe as a very unique position we have in that marketplace. And then the next thing that is really important to us and we work very hard on is product. So not only to, make sure that we are innovating and creating new opportunities for our customers, but also just trying to get better and better and better every day, every month, every year in terms of the user experience. So, how they interact with the platform, how they digest information, and, how simple, easy, intuitive, fun it is to participate in our markets in whatever form that takes. They can participate with us as a trader, or more as a casual hodler. They can, laptop and apps and everything in between.
If you think about kind of like that, like now 15 year journey and this amazing positioning around trust and being a European leader and all these things, if you had to take a critical view, kind of like, and if you had to identify the things that didn't go well, and essentially where maybe you are also kind of lost out on world domination. I mean, why is Bitstamp not acquiring Robinhood type question? What do you think? What are the kind of factors that play there if you reflect on that journey?
That's a great question. So, the thing that sometimes keeps me up at night is all of the investment that Bitstamp has made on the trust dimension and the 60 plus regulatory licenses we have, and the ISO certifications and SOC 2 certifications and the audit I mentioned, which is no trivial undertaking, and all of the investment associated in that was made for the right reasons, and ultimately, I think, has and will serve us well. However, I would say that Bitstamp got zero credit for this investment for many years, really until FTX happened. And during that time, we were making all of those investments. There were competitors who were flouting the whole idea of licenses and compliance. They were breaking the laws and adding market share. So by basically not checking anything when people wanted to participate. And so from a lot of users' perspective, that seemed easy and seemed like the right thing to do. But, it's a bit frustrating from the guys trying to do it correctly, that we could have invested differently and we could have ended up in a different market share position going into the FTX situation. Now, I still think we did the right thing. And I still think, as this next wave happens, as I mentioned, it's going to, that will continue to change. But that's something that I don't think it's a mistake, but I think it's certainly an interesting question.
Yeah, it is right. And if I think about Ivy, right, and we're trying to do the same thing, and we want to be the heaviest regulated participant in this market and all of these things, what would be your advice kind of as a reflection on that journey? Like, how do you make sure you get the credit for that? And what would you have done differently, basically?
Yeah, I think you guys, I think it's different today. So again, this is just my opinion, but today, I feel like we're on the cusp of, requisite level of understanding in the marketplace, both on the institutional side and the retail side, of what it is and why it matters and how it works, and also who to trust. So there's just a good, I think, critical mass level of understanding today that didn't exist in 2016 or 2017 or 2018, right? So I think it's a much safer set of investments for you guys to do the right thing now than what I'm, kind of wondering about when I think back to the 2016 choices. But I also, at the end of the day, and this is just, just one person, but, from my standpoint, you just got to do it right. You just got to do it right. We're talking about real money here. And if, all the people in the ecosystem that are talking about how important Bitcoin is and that it is real money, but if they don't treat it like real money, then it's not. So, yeah, you guys are definitely on the right path.
Yeah, I think in a way you're never wrong for doing the right thing, right? But
that's right.
As you continue to kind of track on that journey, are there any new licenses and any other big regulatory plans that are on the horizon, or is that kind of going to be merged into the Robinhood roadmap? How do you think about further kind of like standalone license acquisition?
Yeah, yes and yes. So we as I mentioned, we've recently attained a MiFID license in the European Union, which we're really excited about. There's a lot of things we can do with that. We have, for instance, a tokenization strategy, which is down the road a piece, but we'll leverage that license and others. We are operating in Singapore, and we have a provisional license from MAS in Singapore, which will be operational as a license very soon, which we're really excited about. I don't know exactly when. It's all up to the regulator to finish their process and make sure everything's in place, which we fully respect. But that's very exciting. In the US, as you may know, we have a BIT license in the state of New York, which is kind of that's a very robust set of regulations and a quite rigorous regulator. And it's kind of the gold standard in the US today because there's no federal framework yet. I'm hoping that that's coming soon. But, we want to kind of continue to leverage the investment we've made in all of these areas to drive trust. And off of trust, we think we get growth and stickiness and all those good things.
Let's briefly talk about stablecoins. You guys recently announced kind of like an extension of the Circle partnership, USDC, EURC on the platform. Maybe briefly walk the wider audience through the kind of use cases you're seeing already, the kind of use cases that you might want to expand into, and what these partnerships mean to Bitstamp.
Yeah, great. So, can't underestimate the important role that stablecoins play in the ecosystem, and even in the early days really enabled kind of frictionless movement of value that made it easier for individuals, institutions to participate in trading platforms or other kind of crypto businesses. And that's just growing. People refer to stablecoins as kind of the first killer use case, for crypto. And it is quite mind-boggling what's possible with stable coins and how it can enable individuals to move value, instantaneously and with, zero or low cost compared to what it takes today, particularly if you want to go cross border. It's kind of like, I don't know, 1960, you have to wait a couple days and you have to pay a bunch of money. And stable coins aren't the only solve for that, but it's, an obvious piece of the puzzle. And then Circle, is, one of the most trusted, reliable providers here. And they have an incredible USDC franchise. And USDC is, very prevalent on our platform and others. And our customers get a lot of benefit by being able to move in and out of that stablecoin easily. And more recently, EuroC, so they're investing heavily in a euro denominated stablecoin. They're an obvious choice for that. They're not the only choice. There's other very credible players in that side of the market too. So curious to see how that will unfold. And what I'm seeing overall is a real proliferation of stablecoins that are very credible. So they have really strong issuers behind them. They've got really interesting models for yield sharing and yield management. And so, yeah, I think it will be quite an interesting part of the ecosystem to watch unfold. And from a Bitstamp perspective, we want to obviously partner with the most trustworthy and most reliable kind of issuers out there. Circle is certainly one of those, not the only one.
And I'd love to get your view on this, because I think it's an interesting perspective, because you're American and you have a pretty deep European business at the same time. How do you feel about Euro stablecoins and kind of like the future of the issued coins? I think there has been, in my perception, a bit of a narrative shift, right? Like from, okay, like this is all going to be USD. The USD is the global trade currency to I think starting with the tariffs, right? It's kind of like this Mar-a-Lago Accord. There's certain ideas to devalue the dollar to achieve certain economic policy goals, where people have been talking maybe a bit more just about euro stablecoins or local currency stablecoins. Like, what's your feeling? Are they going to play a role, or are they going to be absolutely shadowed by kind of USD stablecoin market cap?
Yeah, it's a great question. My personal perspective is there's no good reason why there can't be a very liquid market or set of markets for euro-denominated stablecoins and perhaps other fiat currency denominated stablecoins. However, to your point, the uncertainty created by some of these economic policies in the U.S. are only breathing life into that idea. And I don't think that's bad, but I do think it's real, to your point. I think whereas the USD, either stablecoins or fiat currency, has been default setting in a lot of markets around the world, I think more and more people are asking the question, does it need to be that way? And are there more efficient ways to operate? And so it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I do think that the current U.S. administration's posture towards crypto in general will be supportive of USD and USD stablecoins and kind of preserving the role that USD plays in the global financial marketplace versus where we've been the last few years. But it's hard to predict exactly how it will play out. Right now, the space, there's still so much growth ahead for cryptocurrencies, broadly. There's, I think, room for quite a few valuable stable coins and tokens and denominations, et cetera.
How do you feel about the first 100 days of the Trump administration from a crypto policy point of view? Did they deliver on what you have hoped for, or what's the resume?
Well, it's quite encouraging, I would say. So they have delivered decisively on several of the, campaign promises or commitments that were made during the election. And they've moved with speed and they've moved with certainty. And they've certainly put leaders in place, up to the kind of czar role at the White House, but also the SEC and the CFTC and others who have demonstrated real objectivity and real openness when it comes to crypto versus some of the folks who were there in the past. And so this is all quite encouraging. Now, what's still missing, in my opinion, is a code of law right? So I think we need an actual, legislative action that results in a code of law, a framework for regulation of the space in the US, and something that defines, for instance, the roles of the various regulators in the US. What is the SEC? What's their jurisdiction vis-a-vis crypto, and what's the CFTC's jurisdiction, or the Fed, or how does this all work? There's bills in Congress. There's some really, really well thought out, complete bills that are in this direction, but we have to get that done. So in my opinion, I hope that the administration, continues to focus support on the part of Congress so that we can get some actual law, some actual certainty here. Right now the enemy in the US is uncertainty, and it still, even today, although the situation has changed pretty dramatically in the last couple of months, but still even today, it keeps some people on the sidelines and some people from investing in the US.
Very briefly before we have to talk about Robinhood for a couple of minutes, what would be your envisioned, your dream setup, like single agency oversight, or what do you think would be the smartest way to play it?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I wouldn't count myself as an expert in how to construct this, but the things that come to mind for me is it feels closer to a CFTC kind of jurisdiction for me than an SEC jurisdiction for me, because I've never understood the idea that cryptocurrencies are securities. So that would be, I don't know if that's right or wrong, but that's kind of how I feel about it. And I think the CFTC is a very, very strong principles-based regulator, and they would know better how to help the industry navigate a fully regulated regime. And then secondly, instinctually, the single agency seems more straightforward and easier to operationalize than multiple dual agencies or multiple kind of masters to serve. But I don't know if that's right. I don't know if there's trade-offs inherent in what I'm saying, but those are the things that come to mind.
Yeah, I think it makes sense, right? And I think regulation, ironically, is one of the few things, right? Fintech regulation that Europe usually had a head start on, right? And actually, I think it's not only a joke, but it's actually a good thing. And I think Fintech is still like one of the very few categories, probably only categories where the European outcomes are as big or bigger than the US American ones, right? Like we have our Stripe is nearly as big as Stripe, our Chime is bigger than Chime, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think this is largely due to kind of like pretty clear rules and guidelines and kind of like mandates to oversee. But yeah, let's talk about Robinhood for 5 more minutes at least. I think first question for me was always why sell, right? I think like you've put in the work to build out this trusted brand, the licenses, the regulation, and isn't now the time to shine, basically, right? We've got, I think, some sort of consensus that now the institutional flows are coming in, and these will be the people that care about this. What was the why now for you, basically, from just like a timing perspective?
Yeah, well, firstly, let me say we're tremendously excited about the combination and the possibilities attached to it. Bitstamp is private equity owned today, so it was really our shareholder who did that calculus. And so I can't speak for them. I'm sure there's quite a few variables in terms of their broader strategy beyond Bitstamp, let's say. But what I can say from management's perspective, we're excited about anything that enables us to compete at a higher level. And we're excited about anything that makes our markets healthier, more diverse, more liquid. And we think that this combination creates those possibilities. And so, it's a live transaction. I can't really comment too much about it other than to say, we're incredibly excited about it. And we think, this is again the wrong way to say it, but all of the work that we've put in, that our predecessors at Bitstamp have put in, that the founders, started and envisioned, all of this work can be leveraged even better as part of a broader and more diverse platform. So we're quite excited about it.
And in terms of like the exact summary, and for me, it looks like a distribution meets infrastructure type situation, right? Robinhood has this amazing kind of existing retail distribution, and you bring kind of the infrastructure, regulatory and the tech infrastructure to really lean into crypto. Would that be for you kind of like the headline thought here? Or
I think it's even broader than that. If you look at the two companies, there's jurisdictional differences. So as I mentioned, our big strength is Europe. We've got a growing business in Asia. They're mostly in the US currently today. So that's a potential synergy. Our business has, retail side and an institutional side. Today they're more retail focused. And then quite obviously they're a powerhouse on the equity side and have an incredible crypto franchise that's growing. So there's quite a few opportunity areas, let's say, for synergy. And, we're still in the regulatory approval phase, as I mentioned, so we're not able to, plan together or strategize yet together, but let's just say the possibilities are quite dazzling.
What's your view on kind of like the existing Robinhood crypto stack and offering? Like for sure, there have been conversations on, do we keep one? Do we keep both? Do we merge them? Like what's your opinion? What's smart?
Yeah, I mean, I think their franchise and what they've built is awesome. And I've certainly become a customer and been able to experience it and fuel thoughts out of it. But beyond that, I can't really say.
And if you zoom out and kind of like now think about the broader kind of like consumer fintech market. So I think for me, it feels a bit like this is the race to the middle in a way, right? Like everybody is kind of like leaning in to become the financial super app, right? And I think the traditional fiat focused trading apps and neo brokers like Robinhood are kind of going into crypto with acquisitions like these. We've got Kraken going into more kind of like TradFi focused offerings, for example, Ninja Trade acquisition. Is this where the market is heading in your opinion? Kind of like these offerings converging into kind of like one super competition around the financial super app for the end user?
I can say this from my perspective. There's just still a growing appetite on the part of individuals in particular, but also institutions to do more things. And the idea of being able to do more things via one interface or one app or one relationship or whatever was, I'm sure, quite attractive to a lot of people. It's just simpler, right? I have my bank app, I got my brokerage app, I got my crypto apps. I might have some interesting wealth management things going on, but it's like, a lot of switching costs going on there. So I think undeniable opportunity. Is it going to end up in one super app? I don't know. I think there's room for flavors here, and there's a lot of different kinds of market participants out there. So I think it's a very logical and important opportunity, but I don't really subscribe to like there's going to be one winner that has the giant app that everyone uses.
I mean, I talked to Sebastian from Klarna and he said 4 or 5. Maybe that's let's see. Well, my fingers are crossed to one of those to be Robinhood and Bitstamp. And thank you so much for leaning in. And we're excited to kind of obviously learn more and go granular once the acquisition closes. Fingers crossed for all of these things to go through as smoothly as you guys planned. I would love to wrap it up with a bit of a quick fire round, right? If I have a couple of questions that I would just shoot. Bobby, if you had to be the CEO of a different fintech, which one would that be?
One thing that's very, very intriguing right now is the crossroads of crypto and wealth management. And so I don't have a particular fintech to name here, but I think that's a space that's quite interesting and the sky's the limit there.
Probably Revolut well positioned to do something here. That's usually a cool company to run. What's one thing you've changed your mind on in the last couple of years?
Hairstyle. Sorry, you mean crypto? What have I changed my mind on? Well, I've changed my mind on the importance of stablecoins and the need for more than one and the opportunity for more than one. I kind of thought for a long time, Tether kind of had that and it was done. But I don't think that way anymore at all. I see tremendous opportunity for, like I mentioned, a lot of really, really credible and exciting new possibilities in that space.
Mainly due to localization and local currencies or kind of like yield-bearing capabilities and trades, or?
I would say more the yield-bearing opportunity and the types of traditional financial services players that are getting involved and likely to get involved.
So you're thinking about kind of like proprietary, the JP Morgan stablecoin, just powering that ecosystem, stuff like that, or?
Yes, perhaps. Societe Generale has a stablecoin, SG Forge. There's significant players who are super credible and very smart, and they're not to take anything away from USDT, but they're not USDT. They're slightly different type of asset.
Yeah, I think Bank of America said they would launch one if regulation would be there. Bobby, thank you so much for doing this. And this was a lot of fun. To everyone who was listening, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you learned a bunch of stuff, and we do this every week. So feel free to tune in next week as well and subscribe and follow and do all that good stuff. And Bobby, thank you so much for taking the time. It was a real pleasure, and see you soon.
Thank you very much, Freddie. Have a good one.